Cool. Hey guys, Devin here with Make Anything, and this is the MostFun Pro 3D printer. This machine was launched on Kickstarter nearly 2 years ago, and I decided to give it a review since it promised a lot of really amazing features, and it seemed like it could be a great printer. As it turns out, this better serves as an example of why you shouldn't necessarily back a Kickstarter project just because it looks like the perfect printer for you. This thing looks really nice, and it offered a lot of really cool features that got my interest, but as it turns out, they don't exactly deliver on the promises. In this video, I'm going to share my experience with this machine, setting things up, getting some prints out, and well, yeah, you can see what it's all about. So let's get right into it. The MostFun Pro will arrive in a package not much larger than the printer itself, with everything you need to get started, including the manual. Although the goal of this printer was to make it so easy to use that you wouldn't even need to take a look at the manual to get started with your first print. While the machine is mostly assembled, I wouldn't say that's the case. There's still some assembly required, and even as familiar as I am with 3D printing, there were still some things that I had to refer to the manual for. Like this little filament guide that was 3D printed and needs to be screwed into the back of the machine. This printer has a couple parts that are 3D printed, which I typically don't think is a big deal, except the quality of the prints is not so great. Even machined parts like this filament catcher didn't fit as well as they could have. Still, assembly is rather limited, so it is a mostly built printer. I went ahead and plugged it in and turned it on, and it took about a minute to get started, which is kind of disappointing, especially since they really touted this Intel Edison built into the printer, which is supposed to make it perform better. I was greeted with some Chinese characters, but luckily enough, I managed to find the language setting and switch that to English. You can see I'm controlling this thing with a rather uncomfortable metal rod, which is missing a knob, and I think that's been replaced with a track wheel on the version that's for sale on Amazon now. But this thing isn't exactly intuitive or user-friendly. It took me a while to figure out that you have to long press the button in order to go back. This little bin I showed earlier is supposed to hold this metal brush that is used to automatically wipe the nozzle. That's kind of a nice feature, but the brush wasn't fitting inside the holder even if I forced it in with pliers. I ended up having to soften the PLA plastic using a lighter just to be able to push it all the way through. And you can see that's probably because of this warped bottom, so the print quality of these 3D printed parts isn't great. To add insult to injury, the wiping motion isn't even correctly placed over the brush, which is pretty insane considering that the prints are programmed using a dedicated version of Cura that has the start script already included. Well, let's go ahead and load some filament so we can start printing. I'm going to use this refill and test, which I guess is how you load filament, and we'll see the extruder is heating up here. And just notice how the word heating here isn't just moved down a line and it's cut in half, which obviously isn't a big deal, but it does say something about the attention to detail that is lacking with this printer. The loading mechanism is pretty primitive. You have to push the filament through yourself rather than the extruder pulling it through. Although after it's loaded, you can test it and then it'll kind of purge some filament out. Next up is the auto leveling feature. This was a really big selling point of this printer. The fact that even if the build plate isn't level, the printer itself will adjust the print in order to get a really nice first layer and the clean print thereafter. So the machine probes the four corners and then the leveling process is pretty much done. So I'm going to go ahead and access the SD card and start this 3D benchy. Unfortunately, that auto leveling feature isn't so great, and the nozzle ended up being way too close to the bed, tearing off the blue tape. After rerunning the auto leveling command, I tried again, and this time the nozzle was too high. So although you can adjust the height of the nozzle after doing an auto level, the whole thing is so inconsistent that it's pretty much hit or miss, and I ended up having to run this command over and over again. But eventually I did get my benchy printing, and here are the results. Here's the completed print, and while it did come out, you can see that it's not exactly spectacular. and definitely not competing with other printers in the $1,600 range as this one costs. I figured the quality issues might be related to the unbranded filament that comes with this machine, so I swapped it out for this Recrius PLA instead. With that loaded, I printed out this Squircle mug, which is a larger model and it requires some supports, so it's a good test for the printer. If you take a look at the pulleys of this machine, you'll notice it's got a rather interesting arrangement. This is what's known as a Core XY machine, and one of the main benefits of this system is that it controls the X and Y motion of the printer while the motors themselves are stationary. I found that pretty interesting, and this is the first Core XY printer that I've owned. About 10 hours later, here's the completed print, and I can just pull the bed off of the machine and remove it using the included spatula. Now I've just got to tear off this support material, and we have ourselves a completed Squircle mug. This is a fun little design from one of my old videos that I slightly improved, and now you can download it for free at my mini factory. The part of the print that was held up with support material is a bit nasty, but as you can see, the rest of the print actually came out looking rather nice, with those layers being really clean. My next print was a quick but necessary one, this little knob so that I can control this printer with a little more ease. Honestly, quick little functional prints like this are one of my favorite things to do with the 3D printer. It's super satisfying. Next up, I printed this rather complicated VR sculpt of mine, and you can see it came out pretty good. It had a little bit of stringing that I had to cut off with an X-Acto blade, and the underhangs are kind of messy, but overall, it's an acceptable print. Here's my monochromatic vase. I actually unplugged the printer halfway through the print to test out its emergency recovery system. But as it turns out, that is a feature that they initially advertised and ended up not including. So you can save files and turn off the printer, but if there's a power failure, it's not going to work. And that takes away a lot of the benefit. Finally, I decided to print out my model of this old curved hole illusion, but I was having some extrusion difficulties, and the layers weren't sticking together right. The MostFun Pro does have this quick release, which is kind of nice for maintenance, but you still have to unscrew some things underneath that in order to actually access the area where you can unclog some filament. And even after taking it apart and putting it back together, I still had some extrusion problems. It ended up working when I increased the temperature from 200 to 210 degrees Celsius, but as you can see, the quality of the MostFun print here on the right doesn't even compare to the quality of this CR10 print on the left, a printer that costs a quarter of the price. Here's a little close-up of the top layer of that MostFun Pro compared to the CR10 again, and as you can see, this much cheaper printer has a much better result. So there really is no justification for paying for this much more expensive printer that has subpar results. Alright, well, I played with this printer a bit, I did some example prints, and as you can probably tell, I'm a bit underwhelmed. A lot of the special features that are supposed to make this printer great don't work the way they're supposed to. MostFun really touted this automatic leveling system for their prints. The removable build plate is nice, but the whole system doesn't work as well as it should, and personally, I'd prefer the old school adjusting a few screws underneath the printer to this kind of glitchy thing that's happening here. I also didn't really see any great benefits or amazing results from the Intel processor inside this printer. It takes a long time to start up, and the prints just didn't come out as well as other printers that cost a fraction of the price. To be fair, I didn't try out all the features that the processor allows for, like wireless printing, connecting with your smartphone, things like that. But with the quality of the prints not coming out so great, why even bother? As far as I'm concerned, this printer had a lot of cool ideas, but they just didn't perform as well as they should have. As I was saying earlier, this is a great example of why you shouldn't always invest in a Kickstarter printer just because it seems so great. It's easy for a company to say all the things that their printer is going to do, but when it comes to actually manufacturing and mass producing a machine, a lot of things come up. So with all its cool features that it's supposed to have, this printer ends up not being so great. Although I'm not really recommending anyone to buy this printer, I hope you still found this review useful. Hopefully you can see how you shouldn't just read the specs of a printer. You really gotta look at people's experiences with the machines before you go ahead and buy it, or you might end up with something that's not quite as good as it seems. Alright, that's it for this video. Until next time, I'm Devin, this is Make Anything. Don't forget to stay inspired.